His mother made his black wife sign divorce papers. Later she learned her father was a secret millionaire. The air was thick with tension, heavier than Marissa had ever felt in the 2 years she'd been married to James. She could barely breathe, barely think. The words still echoed in her mind, cutting deep like a knife. Sign the papers. Now. She stood in the living room, staring at the cold, lifeless divorce papers on the coffee table in front of her. Her hands trembled as she looked at her mother-in-law, Susan, who stood there, stone-faced, her arms crossed, and her eyes cold with judgment. Marissa had never thought it would come to this. She thought she had married the man of her dreams, the man who held her heart with such tenderness. But now, it seemed that love wasn't enough. James had been silent, standing just behind his mother, his face unreadable. He hadn't said a word since Susan had barged into their home hours ago, her voice filled with a kind of authority that made Marissa's stomach churn. James had always been close to his mother, but this was different. His mother was demanding that his wife, his black wife, sign divorce papers, claiming that she was nothing but a gold digger. The accusation rang in Marissa's ears like a slap. She wasn't a gold digger. She didn't care about James's money. She cared about him, about the future they'd planned together, about their quiet moments, their late-night talks, their dreams of building something lasting. But none of that seemed to matter now. Marissa, Susan's voice broke through her thoughts, sharp and commanding. I won't let you destroy my son's life. You've been taking advantage of him for long enough. You think we don't see it? You think I don't know what you're after? Marissa's breath hitched, her chest tight with pain. The woman who had once welcomed her into the family was now her greatest enemy. It hurt more than she could say. She had thought they shared a bond, even if it was strained at times. But now, Susan's words hung in the air like poison. I love James, Marissa said softly, her voice trembling with the weight of the truth she knew was being ignored. I don't want anything from him except him. Don't try to play the victim, Susan snapped. I've seen women like you before. You think you can charm your way into a rich man's life and ruin everything. You don't belong in this family. The words hit Marissa like a punch in the gut, but she held back the tears. She couldn't let them see her break. Not now. Not when everything she had worked for was being ripped away in an instant. James, please, Marissa whispered, looking at her husband for some sign of support. You know me. You know I'm not like that. But James didn't speak. His eyes, once full of love, now seemed distant, cold. He looked at his mother, then at Marissa, as though he was caught in a battle he didn't want to fight. I don't know what to say, Marissa, he said quietly, his voice hollow. Mom is right. Maybe this isn't working. Maybe we should just end it. The words stabbed her harder than anything Susan had said. Her heart cracked wide open, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. James, the man she had loved, the man she thought she would spend her life with, was standing there, his mother's puppet. The man she had supported, stood by, and believed in had just turned his back on her. I don't want this. Marissa cried, her voice rising in desperation. I love you, James. Why don't you believe me? But his gaze was empty. There was nothing left for her in his eyes, no flicker of warmth or reassurance. Susan stood there, her face victorious. It's for the best, Marissa. You've gotten what you wanted. You've had your chance. Now it's over. Marissa's world shattered in that moment. She wasn't just losing James, she was losing everything. Her future, her family, her life. All of it seemed to slip through her fingers like sand. With a shaky breath, she picked up the pen and with a trembling hand, signed the papers. The weight of the decision crushed her chest. This wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the end of everything she had known and believed in. The door slammed shut behind her as she walked out, leaving the man she had loved and the family she had tried to be a part of behind her. Marissa walked out into the cool night air, her heart heavy, her eyes blurred with unshed tears. The city of Atlanta bustled around her, oblivious to her pain. She had no idea where to go. She had no place left to turn. She reached for her phone and dialed the only number she knew would pick up, her best friend, Ashley. Ashley had been with her through thick and thin, and though she knew it was late, she hoped her friend would be there for her now. Ashley, it's over, Marissa said, her voice broken. He chose his mother. Come over here now, Ashley's voice was firm and comforting, like a warm embrace over the phone. You're not alone. You're never alone. Marissa hung up and walked aimlessly through the streets, her mind a swirl of confusion and pain. She had loved him. She had truly believed they were meant to be. But now, she was just a memory. A mistake in his mother's eyes. She wasn't sure where she was going, but she knew she couldn't stay in that house, in that life anymore. She had to leave. She had to rebuild, no matter how hard it seemed. It had been weeks since Marissa signed the divorce papers. She still couldn't believe it. Some days, it felt like she was floating in a fog, numb to everything around her. James was no longer in her life, and as much as she hated it, she had to accept that. She had given everything she had to him, and he had walked away without looking back. The pain was sharp, raw. It gnawed at her every waking moment, making it hard to find any sense of purpose in the world. She had left Atlanta, choosing to move to a quieter part of the city, away from the memories of James and his family. But the weight of the past still clung to her like a shadow. She spent her days working at a small boutique, trying to keep herself busy. But no matter how hard she worked, there was always that emptiness inside, that feeling of betrayal she couldn't shake. And then, just when she thought she couldn't take it anymore, her phone rang. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but something about it caught her attention. She hesitated for a moment, but then answered. "Hello," she said, her voice flat. "Marissa? This is Amanda. I'm calling from your late grandfather's lawyer's office." Marissa froze. Grandfather? She hadn't spoken to him in years. He was a quiet man, a successful businessman who had kept his wealth a secret from most of the family. She hadn't thought much about him in a long time, and certainly never expected to hear from him now. "Is something wrong?" Marissa asked, confusion settling in. "Well, it's about his estate. It seems he left something for you. Something very significant." Marissa's heart began to race. What was going on? Why hadn't anyone mentioned this before? "I'm listening," Marissa said, her voice trembling. "There's no easy way to say this," Amanda continued. "Your grandfather passed away 2 weeks ago. But it's what he left for you that's important. He has willed you everything, the entire estate, valued at over $3 billion. The words hit her like a bombshell. $3 billion. She couldn't even wrap her mind around it. You're saying I'm the sole heir?" Marissa's voice was barely a whisper. "That's right. He left everything to you. All his assets, properties, businesses, it's all yours. We need you to come in and sign the documents to officially take control of the estate." Marissa stood there, her mind racing. She felt dizzy, as though the world had just tilted beneath her feet. She had no idea what to think. $3 billion? She had always known her grandfather was wealthy, but she had never known just how wealthy. It was almost too much to comprehend. Her first instinct was to refuse, to reject the inheritance. She had never cared for wealth or material things. All she had ever wanted was a life of love and respect. But then the reality hit her. Her life had just been shattered by James and his mother, and maybe, just maybe, this was the sign she needed to rebuild. "Okay," Marissa finally said, her voice steady but unsure. "I'll come in tomorrow." She hung up the phone, her hands shaking. What had just happened? Was this some kind of mistake? Or was this the universe giving her the chance to reclaim her life? The next day, Marissa arrived at the lawyer's office, feeling more nervous than she had ever been. The building was sleek and modern, and the receptionist greeted her with a polite smile, ushering her into a plush conference room. When the lawyer, Mr. Daniels, entered, he was a tall, imposing man, well-dressed in a dark suit. His presence filled the room. "Ms. Harris, thank you for coming," he said, his voice calm and measured. "I know this must be overwhelming, but I assure you, everything is in order. Your grandfather made his wishes very clear." Marissa sat down, her heart pounding in her chest as he handed her a thick stack of papers. "These are the details of the estate," Mr. Daniels continued. "The properties, businesses, and financial assets. As the sole beneficiary, everything is now under your name. You have full control." She glanced at the papers, but it was hard to focus. The numbers on the page were staggering, and yet, all she could think about was how strange it felt to be sitting here, receiving this kind of wealth after everything she had just gone through. "I don't know what to say," Marissa whispered, her mind spinning. "You don't need to say anything. This is your inheritance. You deserve it, Mr. Daniels said with a reassuring smile. "We've also arranged for a meeting with the business partners, if you'd like to take a more active role in the management of the companies." Marissa stared at the papers, unsure of what to do. Could she really accept this? Could she take control of everything her grandfather had left her? She had spent her whole life trying to avoid attention, trying to stay humble, but now she was being thrust into a world of wealth and power. But then, she remembered the look on Susan's face as she forced Marissa to sign the divorce papers, the cruelty in her voice as she called Marissa nothing more than a gold digger. This was her chance. A chance to prove not just to Susan, but to herself, that she didn't need anyone's approval to succeed. She took a deep breath and signed the papers. "I accept," Marissa said, her voice steady now. As she walked out of the lawyer's office, the weight of what she had just done began to settle in. She had taken the first step toward rebuilding her life. But what now? What did this new life look like? The truth was, Marissa wasn't sure. She had never asked for this wealth, and she didn't know what it would mean for her future. But one thing was clear: she was going to take control. She was going to make her own choices from now on, no matter what anyone else thought. But there was still one question on her mind. How would James react when he found out? It had been a few months since Marissa had signed the papers, and her life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. The once nervous woman, unsure of her place in a world of wealth, now carried herself with a quiet strength. She had taken over her grandfather's businesses, learning the ropes and making strategic decisions that had already begun to pay off. But despite all the money and power, there was something missing, a sense of peace, a sense of closure. The past had a way of creeping back into her thoughts, and it wasn't just the memory of James or his mother. It was the feeling of being unwanted, of being dismissed as not good enough. That feeling of betrayal still stung, even though the weight of her grandfather's inheritance had given her a sense of freedom she never thought possible. But on this particular morning, everything would change again. Marissa was sitting in her sleek penthouse, overlooking the sprawling city below when her phone rang. It was an unknown number, but the name on the screen caught her attention. James. Her heart skipped a beat. It had been months since they last spoke, since that fateful night when everything ended. She didn't know what to expect, but she couldn't deny the curiosity that stirred in her chest. She took a deep breath and answered the call. "Marissa." James's voice sounded hesitant, unsure, like he didn't know how to approach the conversation. "Yes." Her voice was calm, though she could feel the familiar lump forming in her throat. I've been thinking about everything. About you. About us." James paused, and Marissa could almost feel his guilt through the phone. "I want to apologize. For everything. For what my mother did. For not standing by you. I should have trusted you." Marissa's chest tightened. She had spent so much time convincing herself that she was better off without him, that his betrayal was just another chapter of her life she needed to close. But hearing his voice again, hearing the sincerity, the regret, brought everything flooding back. "I don't know what to say, James," Marissa said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It hurt. What your mother did to me, it hurt so much. And you just stood there, watching it all happen. I don't know if I can forgive you." "I understand," James replied softly. "I wouldn't expect you to forgive me right away. I needed to say it. I needed you to know that I see what happened now, and I regret everything." Marissa was silent for a moment, the weight of the conversation pressing down on her. She had worked so hard to move on, to rebuild herself after the pain he caused. And now, here he was, trying to pick up the pieces of a life they both had shattered. "I don't know if we can ever go back to what we were," Marissa finally said, her voice tinged with sadness. "But thank you for apologizing. I needed to hear that. I just needed to know that you didn't believe your mother." James let out a long sigh. "I never did. I just didn't know how to fight against her. She had me convinced that I was doing the right thing. But now I see that I was wrong." The conversation left Marissa with more questions than answers. Could she ever trust James again? Could they ever rebuild what they had once shared? But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that it didn't matter. She had moved on. She had her own life now. She didn't need him, and she didn't need his family's approval. But there was still something unresolved. She still wasn't sure how to feel about the sudden wealth and responsibility that had been thrust upon her. She had built a life that was entirely her own, but that didn't mean she was immune to the complications that came with it. Days later, Marissa was back at the office, going over some financial reports when her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't James. It was Susan, the woman who had orchestrated the betrayal, the woman who had dismissed her, humiliated her, and forced her to sign those divorce papers. Marissa had never wanted to hear from her again, but now, she found herself facing her greatest enemy. She hesitated before answering, but curiosity got the best of her. "Marissa," Susan's voice came through the phone, as cold and distant as ever. "I heard about your grandfather's estate. I'm sure you're enjoying your newfound wealth. But I just want to remind you, you'll never be good enough for James. No amount of money can change that." Marissa's heart pounded in her chest. Her anger flared, but she controlled it. She was no longer the woman who had been humiliated by Susan's words. She was different now. She had power. She had wealth. She had control. "You're wrong, Susan," Marissa said, her voice calm but firm. "I never wanted money. But now, I'm in control of my own life. And I'm not looking for your approval anymore. You can keep your judgments, your hate. It doesn't affect me anymore. I'm not the same person you tried to crush." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Marissa could almost hear Susan's shock through the silence. "I'm not done with you, Marissa," Susan finally spat. "I don't need you to be," Marissa replied, and hung up the phone. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden hue over the city as Marissa sat in her penthouse, sipping a glass of wine. She had learned to find solace in moments like these: solitude, reflection, and peace. Her life, once riddled with doubt and pain, was now defined by success and independence. She had built something for herself that no one could take away, no one could belittle. And yet, despite all the progress she had made, she still couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Something important. Her phone buzzed on the table, interrupting her thoughts. It was an unknown number, but the familiar city area code gave her pause. She almost didn't pick it up, but something told her she needed to. "Hello," she answered, bracing herself for whatever the call might be. "Marissa." The voice on the other end made her heart skip. It was James. The tension in her chest returned instantly, reminding her of the months that had passed since they last spoke. The pain, the betrayal, all of it came rushing back. She didn't know what he wanted now, but she certainly wasn't ready for it. "James," she said quietly, her tone a mix of wariness and curiosity. "What is it? Can we meet?" His voice was soft, almost pleading, as though he had something important to say. I need to explain something to you." Marissa closed her eyes, her mind racing. She had spent so much time trying to move on from him, from the mess of their relationship. And now here he was, asking for a meeting. A part of her wanted to say no, wanted to turn her back on everything that had hurt her. But there was another part, a curious part, that wanted closure. "Fine," she said, after a moment. "Where?" The following afternoon, Marissa found herself sitting in a quiet cafe, her fingers wrapped around a hot cup of coffee. The place was cozy, modern, with warm lights and soft music playing in the background. It felt like a place where she could gather her thoughts, where she could prepare for whatever James had to say. She glanced at the door, half expecting him to walk in looking the same as he did all those months ago, maybe even apologetic. But when James entered, he was different. Gone was the confident, put-together man she had once known. Instead, he looked tired, worn down, as though the weight of regret had taken its toll. He spotted her across the room and walked over slowly, his expression filled with uncertainty. He hesitated for a moment before sitting down across from her. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he said, his voice low. Marissa didn't answer right away. She simply studied him, the man who had once been her world, who had torn it apart so easily. How had she ever trusted him? "I don't know what you want from me, James," Marissa finally said, her voice steady but firm. "We've both moved on. I've moved on. I don't need your apology." James's eyes darkened, and he leaned forward slightly, as though he needed to get his words out quickly before they slipped away. "I know. And I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But there's something you need to know. Something about my family. About my mother." Marissa raised an eyebrow, her interest piqued. She didn't want to care about James's family anymore, but she couldn't help herself. "What is it?" she asked, her tone cool. James took a deep breath before speaking, the words coming out in a rush. I found out recently that my mother, she's been hiding something from us for years. Something big. Marissa felt a strange sense of dread stir in her stomach. What could it be? She didn't want to get involved in his family drama again, but the gravity in James's voice kept her listening. What are you talking about? She asked, leaning in slightly. James looked around the cafe before continuing, lowering his voice. You remember how she treated you. How she made you sign those divorce papers, accusing you of trying to take advantage of me. Well, what she didn't know is that she had been keeping a secret for years. My real father. He wasn't the man we thought he was. Marissa's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? What does that have to do with anything? My biological father, James continued, he wasn't just some random businessman. He was a millionaire, and I just found out that he left everything to me. And when my mother found out about the will, she knew it would change everything. She knew it would change the way people saw me, the way people saw our family. So, she tried to protect herself. And you, Marissa, she saw you as the threat. She thought you'd be after the money. Marissa's heart raced. This was the twist she had never expected. James's mother wasn't just controlling and manipulative, she was hiding wealth and power. You're telling me, Marissa said slowly, trying to process the information, that your mother forced me to sign divorce papers because she knew you were set to inherit millions? And she thought I was after it. James nodded, his expression grim. Yes. And I didn't see it. I couldn't see how she was playing us both. Marissa felt a mixture of rage and disbelief course through her veins. She had spent years fighting for James's love and approval, only to have his mother tear it all apart because of greed. She had been humiliated, treated like a gold digger, when in reality, she had nothing to do with the family's money. It was never about that for her. You're telling me this now? Marissa's voice was low, the pain from the past still raw. You should have seen it back then, James. I needed you to trust me. Not your mother. I needed you to stand by me. I know, James said, his voice breaking. I was weak. I let her control everything, and I hurt you in the process. I'll never forgive myself for that. Marissa stared at him for a long moment, her anger simmering beneath the surface. She could feel the pull of old emotions, love, betrayal, the desire for closure. But as much as she wanted to feel something for James, the truth was clear now. He had failed her. His mother had failed her. And no apology, no revelation, could change that. I don't want your apology, James, Marissa said quietly. I've built my life. I don't need your family's approval anymore. I never did. She stood up, her decision made. James reached out to stop her, but she pulled away. Goodbye, James, she said, her voice firm. This time, I'm walking away for good. Marissa walked out of the cafe, the weight of the conversation still heavy on her chest. But as she stepped into the cool evening air, something in her shifted. It was as though the final pieces of her broken heart were finally falling into place, giving her clarity. For the first time in months, she felt free. She didn't need James. She didn't need his mother's approval. She didn't need anyone's validation. She had spent so long trying to be someone she wasn't, trying to please people who didn't deserve her. And now she was done. Marissa had built something for herself, something real. The wealth, the businesses, yes, it was all part of the inheritance, but it didn't define her. What defined her was her strength, her resilience, and her ability to rise above the pain that had been thrust upon her. She was a survivor, a woman who had fought for love, for respect, and for her place in the world. And she wasn't going to let anyone take that from her. As the days passed, Marissa threw herself into her work even more. She began expanding her grandfather's businesses, making them more successful than they had ever been. But beyond that, she also began giving back to the community, investing in causes that mattered to her, using her wealth to make a real difference in the lives of others. She had created a legacy that wasn't about material wealth or status, it was about empowerment. Empowering herself and empowering others to rise above their circumstances. And it wasn't long before Marissa realized that she was no longer just a woman trying to survive in a world that had tried to break her. She was a force to be reckoned with, someone whose story would inspire generations to come. It was a few months later when the phone call came. Marissa had moved on with her life, focusing on her new ventures, and she hadn't heard from James since their last meeting. But the call that day would change everything. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but the words they spoke shook her to the core. "Ms. Harris, I'm calling on behalf of your late grandfather's estate. We've recently uncovered some new details regarding the family fortune." Marissa's heart stopped for a moment. What more could there possibly be? Had her grandfather hidden something else? "We've discovered a clause in the will that hadn't been processed," the lawyer continued. "It's regarding a trust your grandfather set up for you, a trust worth an additional $2 billion. It's now yours." Marissa could barely speak. $2 billion? Was this real? How much more could one person need? But she didn't care about the money. What mattered was the power, the control, the freedom. It wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. It was about the choices she had made, the life she had built, and the person she had become. A few weeks later, she was standing in front of the mirror in her penthouse, dressed in a sleek black dress for a gala she was hosting in honor of her foundation. The foundation she had created to support underprivileged youth and women striving to make something of themselves, just like she had. She looked at herself in the mirror, at the confident, determined woman staring back at her, and she smiled. She had everything she needed now. She didn't need James. She didn't need his family. She had become the woman she had always dreamed of being. Marissa Harris was no longer defined by her past. She was a self-made woman, a millionaire, a philanthropist, a leader. And no one, no matter how much money or power they had, would ever make her feel less than that again. The gala was a huge success. People from all walks of life came to support Marissa's cause, and as she took the stage to give her speech, the room fell silent. The applause when she finished was overwhelming, but what mattered most was not the applause, it was the look in her eyes. The look of someone who had fought, bled, and cried to get to this point, and who now stood unshaken by anything or anyone. The story of her life, the story of betrayal, heartbreak, and survival, had led her here. But more than that, it was the story of redemption, of reclaiming her power. And as she looked out at the crowd, she knew one thing for sure: her life was no longer defined by anyone else's expectations. Marissa's phone buzzed again, but she didn't need to answer it. She had already said goodbye to her past. She didn't need any more apologies, any more explanations. What mattered now was her future, the future she was creating on her own terms. Marissa was no longer just a woman in the shadows of other people's lives. She had stepped into her own light, and there was nothing anyone could do to dim it. This was the story of a woman who overcame betrayal, a woman who reclaimed her power and showed the world that nothing, not even a shattered heart, could hold her back.